A KC-46 boom versus 5th gen, who wins? The answer might surprise you. Let's talk about the AIB report from a actually pretty recent mishap where an F-22 was refueling with a KC-46 and, well, the boom is no more.
3, 2, 1, fight off.
All right, so this is the AIB report. AMC took the hammer on this because it damaged the KC-46, tail number 176033, which we've talked about. 17 is the fiscal year when it was funded. So anywhere from October of 16 all the way through 2017 is when it's funded for being built. So here's what happened. On 8 July 2025, at 12:52 local time, the Mishap Aircraft 1, which was the KC-46 out of McConnell, was doing air refueling over the Atlantic Ocean, 100 miles off the coast of Langley, Virginia, with the F-22 and 6 other jets assigned to Langley. During an AR attempt with the Mishap Aircraft number 2, Mishap Aircraft 1 experienced nozzle binding of the boom in the receptacle of MA2. Boy, I hate when that happens. Upon release, the boom rapidly flew upward and struck the fuselage of Mishap Aircraft 1, causing damage to Mishap Aircraft 1's auxiliary power unit and tail cone, and a critical failure of the boom shaft structure. Ouch. Which ultimately departed the aircraft and fell into the ocean. There were no fatalities, injuries, or damage. However, it's a Class A because it was nearly $10 million worth of damage. Why did it happen? The AIB president found by a preponderance of the evidence that the cause of the mishap was the mishap boom operator's manual control inputs to the air refueling flight control stick, resulting in an excessive, out-of-trim air refueling boom that caused a radial force to be applied to the ARB nozzle, a nozzle to then become bound inside the receiver's air refueling receptacle. This subsequently produced an unrecoverable boom fly-up rate upon release from the receptacle, striking MA1 and causing a critical failure of the boom structure, and then it departed. Additionally, they found that it was the failure of the mishap fighter pilot to account for the KC-46 stiff boom characteristics. I can't believe we're using these words. Causing an excessive closure rate. That's it. That's the whole thing. So that's the summary. We're going to do a deep dive into what happened. So I've done a bunch of air refueling back in my day. I've never flown off the KC-46. So let's learn about what's different. The boom operator deploys the boom from a stowed position, extends the telescoping portion of the boom 12 feet to perform an initial flight control check. While the receiver stabilizes in the astern position, the boom operator selects the appropriate remote vision system scene for environmental conditions on the primary 3D display. When the boom operator clears the receiver for contact or provides the radio silent visual signal, the receiver removes from the stabilized astern position to the boom contact position. Closure to contact must be slow and stable, approximately 1 foot per second, with receiver stabilizing in the contact position. Boom operator will verify the selected scene remains stable. If the scene degrades or visual cues are not discernible, the boom operator will return the receiver aircraft to the astern position, aka return to pre-contact, and reevaluate scene before clearing the receiver to proceed to the contact position. Receiver then maintains position within the boom's operating envelope. Boy, that sounds complicated. Back in my day, boom operator was in the little pod in the belly and was looking at you. You could flip him off. He'd flip you off. Whether it was a KC-10, which was preferred, or a KC-135. This is all VR and cameras and stuff, so it's a lot different than what most people are used to. KC-46A automatically defines receiver aircraft envelope limits based on the boom operator inputted receiver type. Each receiver has a specifically defined refueling envelope. The boom actuator control unit monitors the boom position and rate of motion to remain within the defined envelope. Should the receiver aircraft approach the limits, the boom control system initiates a disconnect prior to the boom exceeding an envelope limit, which is what we used to do manually. I mean, that was part of it, right? And if it got too bad, it would cause a breakaway, which is what we're going to talk about here in a minute. The boom disconnect limit is reduced for some receiver aircraft because of individual receptacle characteristics, i.e., if you bind it too much, or if you get, it may be more conservative so that it can disconnect and have enough room to retract. based on your receptacle. When the contact position is achieved, the boom operator flies the boom to the receiver aircraft's receptacle using the FCS and extends the boom telescope to make contact. Locking toggles in the receptacle operate to hold the boom nozzle in contact. The receiver then maintains its position within the boom's operating envelope. The digital fly-by-wire system has an automatic load alleviation system, ALAS. ALAS reduces the radial forces on the nozzle and receptacle. This permits a larger AAR envelope without nozzle binding. What is nozzle binding, you might ask? Well, it's a mechanical impedance on the boom nozzle that keeps it from free flight. This impedance occurs when the boom nozzle is stuck in the receiver's receptacle, but the boom is not fully engaged by the toggles due to geometric shape. So it gets kind of off, and it's the long pole, so you're pushing force against it, and it gets locked, and it gets stuck there. So it's not actually locked, but it's kind of binding. That's the name. A breakaway. So a breakaway, which is what I just talked about, is emergency separation of a tanker receiver in or near the contact position. It may be necessitated due to erratic flight by the receiver, a tanker, or receiver aircraft malfunction, the receiver underrunning the tanker, or an excessive rate of closure between the tanker and the receiver. Upon a breakaway being called, the affected tanker or receiver aircraft must immediately disconnect and act in accordance with published guidance to separate. So I've done a ton of these in practice because it's something that they have to check the square and practice doing. I've never had to do one, thankfully, for real. But basically, it is you're in some position, contact, whether you're actually taking fuel or you're just about to be contact or they can't plug you or whatever. And we realize we're a danger to each other. So someone calls the breakaway within, boom operator, pilots in the aircraft and the tanker, and it's a separation maneuver so that we don't hit each other and we don't cause damage. So it's a big deal. It's not as routine as like a go around, even though Wombat has said go arounds are for quitters in jest, but it is definitely something that is practiced so that, when you do it for real, everything is kind of routine and automatic. So the sequence of events, they basically took off from McConnell to go refuel the 4 flights. So they were not local. They were just going to meet them in the airspace. Mishap crew conducted initial mission planning for the day prior to the Mishap sortie, in which attempts to contact the receiver aircraft command posts were made but were unsuccessful. On the day of the Mishap sortie, Mishap crew briefed the mission details in accordance with briefing guides. Preflight, standard. They all arrived at McConnell very early in the morning to do this. They had some write-ups that the ARB roll position appeared to be inaccurate or lagging with no corrective action. After discussion among the Mishap crew, they elected to accept the aircraft and do a flight control check of the ARB in flight prior to conducting refueling. Another attempt was made by the boom operator to attempt to get into contact with MA2's command post regarding training objectives and air refueling operation details, but was unsuccessful. Nothing of additional significance was noted by the Mishap crew during pre-flight ground ops at departure. Mishap Aircraft 2, so the F-22 pilot, was piloted by a student pilot as part of a 3-ship formation led by an IP and another student. So 1 IP, 2 students. Originally scheduled as a 2-ship, the FP2 joined the formation due to maintenance issues with their flight lead. So some other flight had issues, and they're like, hey, come on, you can get training with us. So the accident itself, they went to AR 636 at flight level 240. The boom operator conducted the boom flight control check in accordance with prep for contact checklist and assessed the ARB. Upon completion of the boom flight control check, noticed slight lagging of the boom roll RVS, so what was written up, overlay indication. This assessment was discussed by the crew, ultimately leading to the boom operator being comfortable to begin AR operations. So they knew there was a caution directing boom operators to discontinue AR if boom roll RVS indications appear to lag. It was written up. They decided to do it anyway. Parameters were set amongst the Mishap crew to continue or discontinue air refueling based on receiver aircraft stability. So they kind of set their own limits within. They're like, hey, we'll accept the risk, but we're going to maintain our own little limits within this aircraft. During AR with the first 4 receivers, each receiver received their offload with nothing significant being noticed by the crew. So up to the Mishap aircraft, which is kind of how it goes, everything seemed normal. At 12:45, Mishap Aircraft 2 and her wingman rendezvoused with Mishap Aircraft 1 to begin AR operations. Due to mission objectives, the Mishap at approximately 1645, MA2 and her wingman. That's a weird way of saying it because the MFIP would be the flight lead. I think they're misusing the word wingman because MA2 is a wingman. But anyway, she showed up with the tanker to begin AR operations. Due to mission objectives, the IP instructed Mishap Aircraft 2 to conduct AR with the MA1 first. So usually that's how it happens. You know, lowest of fuel maybe gets there first, or maybe they're first time refueling or whatever. But due to how it was training wise, the IP said, hey, you go first. We'll be in the observation position. And maybe it was, it doesn't say whether that was her first time refueling or what. But anyway, they cleared her to the astern position with IP and the other wingman, so the other student, being cleared to the left observation position. So they're stacked left side, which is standard. Prior to the mishap event, the F-22 student pilot conducted 3 approaches to contact, 2 of which leading to emergency separations. So remember the breakaway thing that I said is not that common and it's kind of an emergency procedure? Well, they had already done 2 of them by the time this happened. During the first approach into contact position, the boom was able to effectively make contact with Mishap Aircraft 2. The boom recognized forward movement toward the inner disconnect limit, verbalized a back 4 correction over the primary frequency, then subsequently called for an emergency separation. On the second approach into contact, Mishap Boom 1 directed Mishap Aircraft 2, so the F-22, to return to the astern position due to instability. So he sent her back. He's like, you're not getting this. You're not a stable platform. Go back to pre-contact. Let's try this again. The third approach consisted of a successful contact with Mishap Aircraft 2, subsequently leading to another separation, emergency separation. So we've now done 3 approaches, all unsuccessful, and the third one is the second emergency separation call. So that's a, no kidding, emergency maneuver. And we've done this now twice with the IP watching with a student. Keep that in mind. At approximately 1652, 11 and a half seconds prior to the disconnect in the mishap event, the F-22 was established in contact at flight level 240, 24,000 feet at 310 knots, which is the standard refueling speed for most fighters, and was stable in the envelope. So she'd figured it out. She had finally gotten whatever jitters or whatever was going on. She kind of calmed down and was stable. The ALAS performance was performing as expected in low radial forces on the ARB nozzle. So all the beeps and squeaks of the KC-46 super boom seem to be working fine. The boom gave many verbal corrections to the mishap fighter pilot, so the F-22 student, throughout the contact to include 1 instance of up 4 and 3 instances of back 4. So up 4 is basically move, like climb 4 feet, essentially, and then back 4 feet. So you're just moving. It's very slight movements. You're not doing a whole lot of, you're trying to stay within that bucket. And they have, I'm pretty sure on the KC-46, like every other, you have director lights, down, forward, up, aft, that tell you where to go with your jet. So you got director lights, you got the boom talking to you, you've got visual references of stuff. I don't know if the KC-46 has it, but like the KC-135 had the TACAN-T antenna, you can line up, but you have references that you're trying to fly formation off of. You're not flying off the boom, you're flying off a position underneath the aircraft, and then the boom operators doing whatever they need to do back there. And like in the Viper, they can kind of steer you around once they're connected. At least other aircraft. I don't know about this one. He also came up with a slow closure 1 second later. So she was getting a little bit of closure. She had this tendency to go, she kept going low and forward because they're telling her to go up and aft, right? So they're saying back 4 and up 4 means she's low and she's going forward, which is binding the boom as she's doing that. The boom is not designed for that. And if you ever look at a boom, you'll see there's actually colors, the green, the red, where it's at its limits. So the other one they say is slow closure because he's trying to get her to go back and she's going forward and she's increasing her closure. So she needs to kind of calm down on the boom here. 1 second later, the boom applied inputs on the FCS, generating increased vertical loads. However, the load magnitude was still below the threshold to trigger the high load visual enunciation. So he did some stuff flying the boom around, and it wasn't outside of limits, but we're getting close. Approximately 0.4 seconds prior to disconnect, the boom operator's commands on the FCS increased vertical loads, triggering the high load enunciation. So now we're in the high load warning. 0.4 seconds later, MB1 commanded a normal disconnect via the FCS prior to the Mishap Aircraft 2 reaching the automatic inner disconnect limit. So the boom operator's on it. He sees this. He goes, disconnect. I guess he sees a student struggling, so he knows this is a thing. MB1 simultaneously applied large TCS retract and FCS fly-up commands. So he's trying to get the boom out of her way because she's just trucking forward, resulting in high vertical forces on the ARB nozzle before it cleared the edge of the Mishap 2 Aircraft 2's receptacle, because she's going this way and the boom is basically doing that. The nozzle was bound in the F-22's receptacle at this time because he's trying to get it to clear. It's like bring it up clear so she can go underneath it. But what happens is it gets stuck. So it gets stuck and it binds. Approximately 0.4 seconds after disconnect, the vertical forces on the nozzle exceeded the maximum sensor value, triggering an ALAS warning message and deactivating ALAS. 2.4 seconds after disconnect, the boom called for emergency separation, calling breakaway, breakaway, breakaway. Again, this is the third breakaway. Over the air refueling primary frequency, the F-22 was still engaged with the bound ARB nozzle, but began to move aft because that's what you're supposed to do. I don't know about the Raptor, but the F-22 or the F-16, we had a button, and you could disconnect and get away. The F-22 was still engaged with the bound ARB nozzle, but began to move aft, extending the telescoping tube and increasing the tension force. Because she's still stuck with it, by going aft, she's pulling that back because it's mechanically bound in that receptacle. 3.1 seconds after disconnect, the nozzle force exceeded an enunciation threshold value, triggering a boom caution message. The boom elevator control surface continued to wind up the trailing edge down, and the boom rudder control surfaces continue to wind up the trailing edge left due to the boom operator's FCS inputs. At approximately 4.7 seconds after disconnect, the F-22 fell aft as part of the breakaway action, but was still bound to the ARB nozzle. Both the elevator and rudder control surfaces reached maximum deflection. That's on the boom of the nozzle. Boom maintained full telescope retract command and boom fly-up command on the FCS and TCS, respectively, with moderate boom fly-right command. So he's trying to fly it away from her. He's still trying to retract this thing because it's stuck. At this time, the vertical and axial nozzle forces reached their maximum values during the incident. Now, 4.8 seconds after disconnect, so 0.1 second later, the boom nozzle separated from the F-22 receptacle, so it broke free, resulting in a decrease in nozzle forces in all three directions, right? Because it's not bound up anymore. It's all of a sudden, all that tension's free. Well, that causes the boom with those control inputs to fly up and right at high rates due to the orientation of the elevator and rudder control surfaces, because it was trying to fly and break off and it finally broke free and it's just going to slap. The high rates resulted in a boom in-op status in which the flight control surfaces no longer respond to boom operator or boom control system commands. 5.3 seconds after disconnect, or half a second after that physically cleared the F-22, the boom impacted the KC-46's empennage. Because the hoist cable rewind rate exceeded a software monitoring threshold, a hoist warning enunciated and the hoist drum locked in place. The impact with the Mishap Aircraft 1 damaged the tail cone because it slapped up. I mean, the thing was, bound, and then all that tension, all that force, while he's trying to pull away, finally released and it just smacked. The impact damaged the tail cone, the AP exhaust duct, and the boom. The F-22 pilot was able to maneuver her aircraft to the right of the Mishap aircraft. The Mishap crew described the impact as a loud noise, violent action, causing the KC-46 to kind of bow wave several times before the boom began to oscillate and ultimately separated from the KC-46. The KC-46 pilot called to knock it off over the air refueling primary frequency to terminate the emergency separation and assess the damages to the aircraft. Due to damage sustained to the boom, the refueling boom, during the impact and separation of the boom from the KC-46, KC-46 received a hydraulic caution annunciation due to major hydraulic line leakage. Following the separation of the ARB from Mishap Aircraft 1, the KC-46 crew requested a battle damage assessment from the IP of the F-22, in which the F-22 IP flew around the aircraft just to see what the damage was. Upon completion of the battle damage assessment, the IP confirmed the ARB did in fact detach from the Mishap 1 aircraft, falling into the ocean, while also noting fuel venting from the remaining portion of the ARB, as well as a cable hanging out the end, which was determined to be the telescoping chain. The Mishap crew was already flying west, so the decision was made to divert to Langley and officially declared an IFE. They ran emergency checklists isolating the left hydraulic system due to the quantity loss, several other checklists, and they determined there was no immediate rush to divert. A second BDA was requested after descending to 10,000 to better gauge the damage. The IP performed this BDA, this is the F-22 IP, and reported the fuel had stopped spraying from the broken portion of the boom, and there were a cable hanging from the boom. They had concerns diverting to Langley due to the single runway and fotting it, which would cause all the F-22s to divert. So then they decided they were going to go to Seymour Johnson because they had KC-46 maintenance support, as well as only being 20 minutes away at that point. They ran several more checklists, notably depressurizing the aircraft at a safe altitude due to suspected fuselage damage and any additional structural damage. They went to Seymour Johnson. They were notified. They prepped the runway, probably rolled the fire trucks. What was left of the boom was raised prior to landing, a little stub, whatever's left now. And they visually monitored the boom upon landing, verifying it didn't fall and contact the ground. Aircraft was cleared to taxi to park once cleared by emergency services. Forms and documentation, they looked at all the various things that might have been wrong with it on the maintenance side. There was an inconsistency with documentation on the in-flight operational check of the maintenance performed to correct the boom lag discrepancy. Maintenance entered a discrepancy, documented the initial IFOC with no corrective action by aircrew. Two other IFOC entries after the initial IFOC discrepancy were closed correctly. The initial IFOC was open at the time of the mishap. We've talked about that. There was a TCTO pertaining to the boom system still open at the time of the mishap, which is a depot level routine for modification to the RVS. All other TCTOs were completed before the day of the mishap. 6 open TCTOs noted for modifications air refueling manifold at the time of the mishap. Damages. Both the KC-46 and F-22 sustained damage while the boom was still in contact position. There is the remaining portion of the boom right there and the missing latch hook eye. Basically, it's sheared off. Jeez, that's what it looks like. And that's the tail cone. Qualifications, they've been flying a lot, 17 hours in 30 days, 43 hours in 60 days, and 54 hours. The co-pilot, 59 hours in the KC-46, and initially qualified in February, so about 4 months had been called. There was a third pilot on there. I guess they were swapping out and had not flown much. Boom operator had 1,000 hours on the KC-135 and KC-46 and had flown 10 hours and 30, 13 hours and 60. And then another boom out there was also pretty experienced as well. All right, so the IP in the Raptor had not flown in the last 7 days, 4 hours and 30 days, which is pathetic, 14 hours and 90 days, which is standard for the Raptor community. Had been flying the Raptor since 2018 and only had 1,000 hours. So that shows you how little the Raptor community flies. The wingman, however, the student pilot, had 13 hours total in the F-22, was under the supervision of the IP for air refueling operation, and she had flown 1.8 hours in 7 days, 10.9 hours in 30 days, a B course, essentially. Everybody was medically qualified, no health conditions, no toxicology, crew rest and duty time, all seemed normal. No evidence suggests operations were a factor in this mishap. In consideration of the issues with the lagging boom, the mishap crew discussed whether to continue with AR as planned. The boom informed the mishap pilot that he was comfortable attempting AR and would reassess if there were any issues. They indicated that he did not feel any external or internal pressures despite the laggy boom. So this is what the opinion is of the board. By the preponderance of the evidence, The cause for this mishap, or one cause for this mishap, is the mishap boom operator's manual control inputs to the air refueling flight control stick, resulting in an excessively out of trim boom that produced a radial force to the boom nozzle, which caused it to then be bound inside the receiver's refueling receptacle. This subsequently produced an unrecoverable boom fly-up rate upon release of the receptacle, striking MA-1, the F-22, and driving a critical failure of the boom structure, which then departed in flight. Additionally, I find one additional factor substantially contributed failure of the mishap fighter pilot 1 to the F-22 pilot to account for the KC-46A stiff boom characteristics causing excessive closure rate. That's terrible. That's a terrible. I'll get to my opinion here in a minute. Following a thorough review, it became bound to the receptacle. In the absence of this high radial nozzle force, the ARB telescope would have retracted under the TCS command. Binding of the boom in the receiver's receptacle is possible even with a disconnect signal if nozzle binding occurs or suspected neutralized boom flight control inputs before retracted. Substantially contributing factors: failure of the F-22 pilot to account for the boom stiff characteristics causing an excessive closure rate. The KC-46 has several documented deficiencies that complicate its ability to accomplish its air refueling mission. One such deficiency is the boom telescope being too stiff while in contact with the receiver aircraft, causing the receiver aircraft to inadvertently carry an excess amount of thrust while following a disconnect can cause the receiver aircraft to rapidly accelerate toward the tanker. Receiver pilots are required to make large power corrections when attempting to make fore and aft position adjustments to mitigate the stiff boom deficiency. The deficiency also contends that once the breakout forces were overcoming, an excessive telescope rate would build if the receiver pilot did not apply an immediate power correction or arrest slower forward aft motion. In this case, all data throughout the investigation shows that the mishap aircraft 1 provide a stable platform for multiple receiver aircraft, including the F-22 in question. A student pilot seemingly had a difficult time refueling, causing 3 emergency breakaways during the air refueling time frame. During the mishap air refueling contact, the F-22 moved forward and the air refueling envelope approximately 7 feet in 10 seconds, approaching the inner telescoping limit. When the boom triggered a disconnect, they can still mishap aircraft 2 continued its inward movement an additional 2 feet, causing a direct emergency breakaway. Following the breakaway command, the fighter pilot in question followed the appropriate procedures and reversed the forward movement. However, prior to the breakaway procedures, the fighter pilot did not account for the excessive power setting used to overcome the breakout forces and did not stop her closure rate in an acceptable manner. As a result, the F-22 moved forward relative to the mishap aircraft 1. So they find by the preponderance of the evidence that MB1 made manual control inputs to the ARB during separation, caused a radial force to apply to the ARB nozzle, resulting in becoming bound within the receiver air refueling receptacle. As a result, the bound forces exceeded structural and program limitations. And then there was the MFP1. All right. So there's a lot to unpack with that one. I don't agree with the findings on this. And that's rare because usually I do, but I'm a fighter guy. I don't want to say I disagree in that this is a terrible report. I think we missed the point. So one, the KC-46 is weird. With all the tech and the fancy everything, it's a lot different than what we had in the KC-10 and the KC-135. And the fact that there's this binding problem is a problem by itself. I'm going to give you that. But it's a student pilot with 13 hours. Right. I think we all need to understand that. This is a B course student. Air refueling is something that's hard on a good day. And if you're struggling I remember, as a young cocky wingman making fun of my flight lead for not being able to get on board, who was an IP, he was a weapons school guy. And he just had a bad day and he was struggling. And I made fun of him. And then, the next day it happens to me. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay. Now, as I said in the beginning, didn't have any breakaways. Breakaways are a big deal. If you're getting into breakaway territory, now maybe it's more common in a KC-46 than what I saw in the KC-10 and the KC-135. And if that's so, that means the KC-46 is a giant piece of crap because you shouldn't be doing breakaways. I mean, it really shouldn't. And the evidence that it was mostly fine. Now, granted, did they accept an aircraft that was less than ideal? Yes. But is that causal? I don't know, because I don't know what the common how they handle that stuff in that community. But if they were all okay with it and it had worked the first 5 times or 4 times, then that's probably not it. That's probably not the problem. The problem is you have a student and you have an IP that allowed this to develop. I mean, personally, the third time we had 2 breakaways, right? So I think at that point she was done. Probably before that, probably when she had her first breakaway. I mean, I know tanker support is hard to find and flight time is limited and all this stuff, but man, we have seen so many times where the admin stuff is what gets you, the tanker stuff, and nobody kicks ass without tanker gas. We need tankers. Tankers are important, but I think it's the IP's responsibility to see that the student is clearly struggling and put it into this before it got to that level, because she wasn't just struggling once. She wasn't just struggling twice. Even when things were going well, she was struggling. I mean, she was all over the place while she was on the boom and sent back to pre-contact. We had 3 resets before we had the event. We had the 2 breakaways and the 1 return to pre-contact. To me, that's enough that we got to go. King's X, we're going to stop for now. We're done. We're going to talk about it. We'll debrief it. We'll figure this out. Because remember, the F-22 is single seat. When you are in training, your first time, there's no IP to take it from you. There's no IP to show you the position. So whatever it was, the student wasn't getting it. And we kept doing this. Now, is that something the boom could have said? Maybe, but I think it becomes the IP's responsibility to put a stop to it. Now, did the boom have errors? Yeah, according to this, the boom operator did. But I think we go back. If I'm going to go root cause, I'm going to say we had the signs to not push this to this point, and instead of accepting it and okay, we're incomplete or we're unsat for the refueling after 2 breakaways or 1 breakaway, we continued and put it to a position where we damaged 2 aircraft, because the boom bound because of the student pilot's actions. The boom did not malfunction and bind. We got into a situation with a closure rate and being too far forward, which led to the breakaway, which led to the worse situation, which led to the boom operator mishandling that, not taking any responsibility off the boom operator, but which led to that mishandling, which ended up causing the damage to the boom. So I disagree. I mean, this might be, tanker guys, when they look at it, they go, who's at fault for the tanker? But I kind of root cause this back to the IP, because, I just, when your student is struggling, you can't keep putting them out there when it's clear that they're just not getting it. I mean, the signs were there and the IP was watching, and I don't know. I mean, again, we're very fortunate this wasn't a fatal mishap. We're very fortunate this wasn't worse. And everybody's alive to tell the tale and learn from it. But I think if we're learning from it, we need to be honest. And I think it goes back to, we shouldn't have pushed 3 emergency breakaways. I mean, that's my takeaway on it. But again, haven't done this in a while, so could be wrong. That's just my opinion. It's no one else's. Doesn't represent any official opinion or anything like that. That's just what I think about when I read this. But let me know in the comments what you think. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.